Hey, Raphael. How are you?
Hello. Hi. I'm
Where are you
fine.
joining us from?
From Constance.
Okay.
And early. Yeah. Sorry.
What time is it where you're at?
It's 17. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
And it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You know.
Nice.
Yes. And you have which time? The same, I
We're
guess. Yeah.
it's about 11 o'clock where we are.
All right. Thank.
Thanks for joining us. How did you learn about the webinar, by the way?
It's online. I saw it online.
Nice.
Yes. And have a good time. Yeah. Great time. Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
it's
you.
gonna be
Yes.
fun.
All right, we'll give it a few more minutes. How's it going today, Dave?
Going well. How are you?
Doing all right. Give another minute or two. For those who aren't that familiar with Plus One, this first slide is just kind of a little bit of, an intro slide about us. We're predictable productivity for the modern warehouse. We focus on induction, depalletization, and palletization. Currently, we've got over 1 billion picks in the industry. And if you were to add up the rest of our competitors, we would and combine them, we'd still beat them in the amount of picks. So just to let you know, we've got a lot of experience in this space. Also, we've got over 250 systems deployed in 15 countries. 60% of our business is in Europe, and we were founded in 2016. All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know a lot of people like to register and then watch the recording afterwards, so that's totally fine. Um, all right. So everybody, thanks so much for joining us today. This is our fifth installment of the Get a Grip webinar, and we're going to talk about robot arms versus people arms today. So before I introduce today's speaker, I want to share with you that Alex and his wife just welcomed a new baby. So he has been our only speaker thus far, and so we're happy to have Jose with us today, but that's why he's not available. So anyway, we're super excited with him for them, and he's obviously taking off some important time to be with the family right now. So as I mentioned, our speaker today is Jose Hotema. He's a hardware test engineer on our product team. I'll have Jose introduce himself here in a second. But today, Jose will take you through the case study of robot arms versus people arms from the lens of Plus One Robotics. Our philosophy is not about replacing individuals with robots, but focusing on the opportunities that automation opens up and then upskilling those employees to fill new roles. So for those of you who are new here today, my name is Lisa O'Brien, and I'll be your webinar host. And a few quick notes before we get started. We like this experience to be a little bit more conversational, so we invite you to turn your cameras on if you'd like, if you feel comfortable. If not, that's totally fine too. We just want to get to know everybody, and so that's kind of why I was, reaching out to people I recognize at least on the chat. So if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you during the webinar. Also, you can put it in the chat and we'll do our best to answer it during the presentation. If not, we'll just address all questions at the end too. So, and then lastly, today is being recorded, so you'll be receiving an email afterwards with a link to the recording if you want to revisit that. So before we dive in, let's welcome Jose Hotema, today's presenter. Let's go ahead and get started. Jose, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so let's kind of set ourselves in. Hope you're nice and comfy. If you have a little cup of coffee with you, that's going to be great. It's going to go well with this topic right here. It's very interesting to me. So as the title suggests, we're going to be doing a little bit of like comparisons between people arms versus robot arms and diving deep into what this means, not just for plus one robotics, but the robotics industry as a whole, right? A little bit about me before we get started, just so you kind of know my background here. Um, my education is in mechanical engineering. I graduated from the University of Texas in San Antonio, and my role here at Plus One Robotics is the hardware test engineer. In essence, my job is to break the robots and break the vision system. I get to actually say that I break things for a living. Just to give you a little bit of background about me, I am I was born in Mexico, where my dad owned a machine shop. So that was like one of my first taste of like engineering work, as you can tell from this very fun picture of me kind of just posing in a forklift that he had. I think at the time I was like, man, this is so cool. Uh, and kind of that was the start to me kind of moving towards being an engineer. And then after that, I did a little bit of HVAC sales right after college. HVAC wasn't really my calling, so I took a hard pivot and I ended up at Amazon Robotics in Boston for a little while. That was a really fun experience. And then from across all of this time, right, I was developing my skill to just talk. And it's actually kind of how I found myself in Plus One Robotics, because as a certified yapper, certified talker, I love having conversations with people, especially when it came to topics that I was passionate about, such as robotics. That's actually where at a school event at UTSA, our founder, the Plus One Robotics founder, Sean, came and did a presentation on robotics, and I was immediately hooked. I was like, man, this is going to be the place I'm going to work at. So I met with Sean after, and I was like, hey, like if you ever need anything, hit me up. I'm available. I'll come and like I'll sweep your floors if I need to. I just need to be around robots. And this was all like through LinkedIn. I was such a great talker that he stopped responding, and I was still talking to myself. And then a few years passed. I got a little bit more experience under my belt, and I think he, looked at me a little bit more differently once I had some applications, and I showed that I could like do the job. So that's a little introduction as to how I got here. So to get started, I want to kind of give you a little bit of an overview on what it is that we're going to talk about. Obviously, we're gonna get straight into it, address the elephant in the room, and get through that comparison, right? The humans versus robots comparison. And I think you're gonna find that Plus One thinks about it a little bit differently than most. We'll go over what dull, dirty, and dangerous is, how to know what you don't know, and then when you do go robotic, what to do after, right? And I'm not talking cybernetic enhancements. We're still in the logistics space. And then we're going to finish off with the benefits of Yonder and a little recap at the end. And also, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I might even ask for a little participation, even if it's through the chat. But if not, feel free to join in and participate as you like. Okay, so humans versus robots. Plus One Robotics, one of the first things that appealed to me was when I first joined the company was that they took the approach of recognizing that the human has qualities that inherently makes them really valuable. Compared that to the robot, which kind of sometimes lacks in those areas. So just to kind of do a quick little compare and contrast, let's get kind of going here. So a human, fortunately, comes with its own pairs of eyes and hands. And I don't know if you've ever seen a robot, but robots don't really come with eyes or hands. Also, humans are relatively cheap up front, right? So, and robots are expensive. Humans are also flexible, right? We can do a lot of different tasks, pick up different things. Robots, once you install them or you program them, they're really only meant to do one, maybe two things at most. Humans are also easy to find, right? Like you can like look around, probably got some human near you. But if you look around looking for a robot, they're not really available. They're not really common. Also, humans don't need a lot of training, right? We have years and decades of evolution to help us like quickly grasp concepts. Robots don't have any of that. It takes engineering power, coding, and design to get a robot to work. There's also already a process in place to hire a human. There isn't one for a robot. That takes a lot of lead time and planning. Also, humans have been the go-to labor source for a long time. Robots are fairly new. They're barely kind of getting integrated as companies take on automation. And my favorite one of all is that humans are pretty easy to talk to, right? We're all here talking to each other, listening to each other. Every time I try to do it, the robots are kind of quiet, right? So what does that kind of like as a whole summarize the human to robot comparison, right? Humans, I think, inherently have some great qualities, which are these three right here that you see. One, we are curious creatures, right? We are looking for meaningful work. We like to get variety in our variety in our task, and that's gonna like lead to increased happiness, right? From whatever job we take on. We are also social creatures by nature. So the job that we have a lot of times gives us a lot of social credit and a lot of social standing amongst our groups, right? Whenever you introduce yourself for the first time, similar to what I did, the first thing you do is say your name, followed by usually by what? The kind of job you have, right? Because it gives you a sort of social identity. We are tied to or we have tied our social identities to our jobs. And then finally, for better or worse, we are emotional creatures, right? We get whenever we get feedback from the job that we're doing, and that's good feedback, we're going to feel very proud. Whenever things happen in our life that don't necessarily feel good, we're going to feel sad, right? And that all three of these things kind of show how complex humans can be, and then for the better or worse, how we can perform in our task. Which kind of brings us to talking about what is dull, dirty, and dangerous, right? So we just talked a little bit about what things affect our output and our performance on the job. When we say something is dull, right, a task is dull, it usually means that it brings us zero to no stimulation. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the task is always too easy, right? That's the lowest hanging fruit to point out. It's like, oh, a repetitive task will get boring. But also a challenging task, a task that is too challenging will not let us enter like a flow state, right? Think of like the time you had to do a really long essay for school or had to do a bunch of math homework, right? There's a reason why you dreaded starting it. It's because it wasn't necessarily to your interest, right? So jobs that offer no upward mobility or personal satisfaction will always struggle to retain workers, right? And then moving on to dirty. In the Western culture, we value personal hygiene and clean work environments very highly, right? Also, biologically speaking, we are programmed to avoid things that are dirty. Being exposed to the elements isn't necessarily a fun thing, right? There's a reason why you kind of ick whenever you see the color yellow. It's just not a pretty color, and it's been biologically programmed to make you feel a little scared. It's why warning signs are yellow. So roles that are constantly exposed to the elements will always struggle to attract applicants, right? So we start thinking about what kind of jobs are those, right? That are dull and dirty. And then finally, dangerous, right? Danger comes in many forms, right? Sometimes it could be similar to the other one, overexposure to the elements. It could be heights, right? I have a fear of heights. I'm not getting anything taller than like maybe 5 feet. And then there's also big machinery, right? Sometimes those can pose a threat. But also, danger can also come in the form of physical strain, such as repetitive motions, right? And think of all the costs that are associated with getting injured at work, right? There's the very obvious financial, right, strain, right? If an employee of yours gets hurt or has to go to, um, you know, go start seeing like a doctor because their back is injured, not not just that, but also think about the the conversations that people are going to have about your workplace, right? When someone, when Greg falls on the slippery floor, we're all going to be talking about it. We're going to be like, oh, did you hear this? Did you hear that? Like, it's not going to give your job or your company a good reputation if people are constantly getting hurt, right? So whenever we think about dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks, we kind of identify those two more than anything, prime and ideal candidates for automation, right? Not only because they need to be, there's already a shortage in demand, but there's also a need to get like the human component out of it, right? Out of the dull, dirty, and dangerous. So we're going to play a little game. This is kind of where you can feel free to kind of throw some answers in the chat. If you're less shy, if you're a little bit more confident in your history knowledge. So we're gonna take a look at some dull, dirty, or dangerous tasks, right? And what became of those jobs. The first one being pin boys, right? Oh man, I just gave you the answer. But basically, I was gonna ask you, can you guess what this job is? It's pin boys. This used to be a job that a lot of families would have their kids take on because it was relatively easy, and they could kind of be there all day and add to like the family income. And so basically, their job was to quite literally wait for someone to roll the bowling ball. They would hit a strike or hit a few pins, and their job was to kind of like come back and put all the pins back up. So, whenever you think of this job, what did it get replaced with? That's right. It got replaced with machines, right? The automated pin stacking machines that you see when you go bowling. And when you go bowling, you don't think, man, I really wish those kids were back on there and I could just maybe hit a little bowling ball and whack it. Because I've seen people whack that machine. And if you do that, not nice. The robot doesn't like that. All right. So can anyone guess what this job is? I'll give it a few seconds this time. Think vertical spaces. See if there's anyone brave enough. All right.
Elevator operator.
Yes, thank you. Elevator attendants, yes. This used to be a real job, right? So your job was to basically stand there all day, wait for the people to come in, and they would tell you what floor they were going to, and your job was to like put them in, close the door. And in the early days, there was even a crankshaft that you had to like manually turn. And this was a job that you would date for 40 hours a week, day in, day out. And what did that get replaced with? Buttons. That's right, buttons. So not just buttons, right? But the automated elevator, right? An automatic elevator. When you get in an elevator, you're not thinking, man, I really wish it was a real person doing this job for me. No, right? And then this one's a little bit of a harder one. This is something, this is specifically a picture like at a bank or at NASA. What do you guys think they're doing? Okay, I'll give you like 5 more seconds.
There was a movie. Yeah.
All right. So this one is a little bit harder, but these ladies here were paid by banks or by NASA just to do simple calculations. And I'm not talking about like calculus needed to get to space. This was strictly just, hey, we have some data sheets and we need to multiply or subtract or add. And what did that get replaced with? Calculators and software like Excel, right? And same thing. It took essentially the task of just doing simple math and put it into a software format. And then this is the classic one. Can someone tell me what these ladies here are doing? Telephone operators. That's right. This one's pretty easy, right? And what did that get replaced with? The telephone, or specifically phone numbers, because a lot of people think like the technology itself is what replaced the telephone operator. It's more so the system changed so that people were basically could be identified by a serial number. right? That's what your phone number is. And then the final frontier for at least plus one robotics is, can someone guess what this is? I'll give you a hint. Honestly, I'll just answer for you. It's manual induction, right? It's the manual fulfillment of packages. So what does that look like in the future? I'll give you a little hint. It has to do with plus one robotics. So again, kind of going back to, right, to targeting jobs that are dull, dirty, and dangerous. And it's not just me saying this, there's definitely a trend that we are starting to see, that people are literally seeing jobs like this and taking them for what they are, temporary, right? So here is a real review from a former warehouse employee talking about his experience at the warehouse. And look at the title: easy job to get, easy job to leave, right? The benefits are good, but the work is hard. And bringing a big emphasis on the cons, right? The work is physically repetitive and the long hours can get to you. I'm sure, I don't know if this means like mentally or physically, but I would assume somewhat of both. In fact, whenever I was in college and it was the early, time in the semester when textbooks needed to be bought, we would have the saying among students where it's like, oh man, if you just need some quick cash, like go burn a little bit of your life source and go work at a warehouse, right? Because you're not going to be there very long. The work is going to be hard, but you're going to be compensated pretty well for that, right? But it's, again, there's a reason why there's a labor shortage for this task. So whenever, not just plus one robotics, but companies as a whole want to target places to automate, they need to look at boring, right? Boring is where robots belong. Robots can work tirelessly on simple and repeatable tasks. Robots will perform today the exact same way they will perform tomorrow. That means they are predictable, right? And predictability, when you're a business owner, means profit, right? Because I rather have a consistent 96% or 97%, maybe not always 100, as good as a human, but it makes it more valuable for me because I can predict around this. I can predict my income around this. I can predict workflows around this. Also, if something is modified on the robot because they are so consistent, right? Let's say we try to increase output by, even just 2%. If we do some mechanical modifications or code modifications, if something doesn't work right, we can always roll it back, right? And we can try and try again, or try, fail, try again, try, fail, try again. And also, the key thing here is that robots, when implemented right, do not take jobs. They open up opportunities. The way I think of this last one, and this is the driving, this is going to be the driving theme across this presentation, is that's why identification of the role is key, right? For example, think of the last time you kind of, I guess for me, one of the times that I can think about like software actually helping my mental bandwidth is when I was working with my dad, and one of my tasks that my dad would give me was doing receipt tracking, right? Taking that week's receipts, whether it was lunch, whether it was tool purchases, and putting them over to an Excel sheet. That used to be, to me, a quite dull task. So whenever software like QuickBooks or Expensify can quickly just kind of take a picture of your receipt and transfer that data over, what did that do for me, right? It's not like I didn't think, oh man, I wish I could really still track receipts like the old ways. No, it opened my bandwidth to start thinking more about how I can help my dad with marketing, with pricing strategies, with actual work that took my mental bandwidth and gave me more of personal satisfaction, right? Fulfillment. This is what worst case scenario can look like. This is a viral clip that I like to show my friends sometimes when they ask, well, what is it that you do? And like, why are you doing it? Right. I always show them something like this. It's like, is this the kind of fulfillment you would want if you were working in this place? Right. That's a lot of orders. And as online shopping becomes more popular, this problem will only get worse, right? It's only gonna the piles are only gonna get taller. So instead of doing induction like this, Plus One Robotics wants to do induction like this. same task, picking up a package and putting it back down. And this is what
And
I
the other
believe.
thing,
Mhm.
oh, I was just going to add that, in that video, you see lanes full of people staffing and in manually inducting, but the lanes in the US just unfortunately don't look like that, right? I think everybody knows that there's a labor shortage. It is hard to find people that want to do that. And when you do, like you were saying, they're there temporarily just for textbook money or whatever it is. So it is the little stuff that you do have is a revolving door.
Yep. Very good. So I've kind of painted this picture, right, of human arms at work and robot arms at work in a physical space and in terms of a job and as a task, right? What the differences there are. So now we can talk a little bit more also about the information humans provide and robots provide in the workplace, right? How to know what you don't know. Is there such a thing as oversharing, right? The way we're going to kind of discover this is by setting a little bit of a scene and doing a little bit of role play here. So pretend you are the owner of a gift wrapping service and you have 10 employees and you want to increase the number of gifts you can wrap by 20%, right? So in the chat, can someone uh, tell me what kind of data you could use to accomplish this? Like, what are some of the things that you would take a look at? As you're kind of thinking about this, you're going to start noticing, like, man, what am I going to look for, right? And you're going to start thinking, man, this is kind of a hard task to do when you're thinking about a human, right? So that means diagnosing root causes can be even harder, right? If you don't know what you don't know. And kind of like to help you like kind of think about what components would be needed here, you would just, what kind of data points could help you maximize efficiency? Let's see. That's a good one. Cycle time to wrap. Yep. Can I get one more? Yep. Honestly, that's probably the biggest one. And then let's see, what are you using? What do you have to actually make the sizes with? Right? There's different. I don't know if you've ever worked like in a post office, but they have like those like long kind of like vertical cutters where you're using scissors, right?
Like a
So what is
jig
that?
or something.
Yeah, like a jig, right? You have to look at the tools. What kind of tools do we have? Are they sharp enough? And then, so cycle time, tools, and I'll kind of just give you the last little hint, right? It's mood, right? Because remember, we talked about we are also emotional creatures, right? And unfortunately, unless they're wearing a mood ring, you don't really have that feedback from your employee. You can ask them how their day was, but are you going to do this day in, day out with 10 employees, right? And it's not just mood, there's also external factors, right? So maybe um, it's the day after the Super Bowl when around 15 to 20% of all workers across industries decide to take PTO, right? There's no way you're going to increase throughput at that point, right? You're just lacking in numbers. And if you wanted to look at, right, the cycle time to wrap, right, you would have to, what would that look like? Maybe you want to maximize whether they're doing hamburger style folds or hot dog style folds, right? You need like some sort of motion capture. And I don't know about you, but putting on a motion capture suit like this is not really part of my job description, right? Unless you're Shaquille O'Neal and you pay him well enough, maybe he'll throw on the motion capture suit. So what is that? And then compare that, right? So compare that to how a robot shares data, right? It doesn't need motion capture. It's usually just some sort of protocol on the internet, and it's giving you all that data, right? Kind of like this. We're not going to stay here too long. I know if graphs start looking a little scary, but basically robots, even when you don't ask for it, will always be putting out their numbers, right? Their efficiency, their throughput, quality even. And you don't have to ask it. You don't have to tap it on the shoulder and ask it, hey, how are you feeling today? You can actually just go on your phone and find it from anywhere in the world as long as you have the internet connection. You can set it by time range. You can set it by locations. That is one of the inherent values with robotics versus manual induction, is that you always get that feedback right back to you. Right. And again, kind of going back to that scenario of like improving the gift wrapping business, right? If you had robots doing it and you wanted to improve, it's a little bit easier. You can just reprogram. In order to change how people behave, right? You're now looking at producing incentives, you're training, maybe you get new hires, but then you have to train them again, right? And changing human behavior sounds a lot more like psychology than logistics, right? So it's a lot easier to change robots. So, right, you've seen the differences in robotic arms versus human arms. You've seen the differences in how they can relay information. And let's assume, right, I just sold you well enough that you do decide to install the robots. So what now, right? What happens to your system and your workflow and your employees, right? Let's say you made the jump. This is where I think the entire industry, not just in logistics, but the entire robotics industry needs to start having conversation about. And it's about how we upskill from here, right? The very first thing you need to do is encourage conversation, right? In conversation, you're going to have to try to like add a sense of ownership. You're going to have to talk about where their interests lie so that you can find where their abilities can kind of go to, right? Kind of going into promoting innovation and adaptability. And then finally, once you have, maybe they're good at, watching the flow. For us, a lot of times it looks like watching the flow of packages or managing the robots. And people, you would be surprised how many people would love to interact with the actual systems that are being in place. So that's after you've had conversations, you've kind of like promoted some innovation and curiosity in the system. This is where you can rescale and redeploy, right? And Plus One Robotics has a very cool approach to this because basically we're taking the talent that used to be on these lines and still applying it back into the robotic spaces that are now being put in place. And we call this Yonder, the human in the loop. So what does upskilling with Yonder look like? Imagine, right, that you used to be the person that had to like pick and place these packages all the time. You're going to have historical knowledge of the kind of package sets that come in, the kind of issues with packages that you see, the way that labels kind of stick around and fall off, right? This is valuable data to a system that will inevitably, like most AI, find itself in a situation that it can't recover from. So Yonder has crew chiefs or people that are familiar with the package sets. Basically, anytime the robot has trouble, it will call upon Yonder or a crew chief to help it navigate the situation. So who better to do this than the people that have that historical knowledge? And the best part about it is that instead of being right there on the floor, this Yonder software can be used anywhere. And that adds the human in the loop components for the situations like this, where packages are outside of the bounding area. Here again, like it's just like, hey, I'm so used to seeing packages within this frame. What am I doing? Right? Oddly shaped packages that the AI doesn't recognize. And the best part about it is that whenever people talk about what they do, right, you go from saying, oh, I just pick up packages and put them back down. Now you're saying, I manage robots. Oh, I help train an AI model. Think about the social and the cognitive benefits that the user is going to get. So not just in this industry, but across different industries, try to use the historical knowledge that is there from the humans, right? Yonder specifically, I think is a really cool system because it kind of behaves like a video game. in the sense of you just need an internet connection and how to use a scroll wheel or a mouse to actually operate it. And the best part of all is that it covers the shortfalls of the AI that will always inevitably be there, right? As much as people like to claim that their AI model is going to be great, it's never going to have issues, that's just not the case, especially when you put AI into a physical space. So to recap, I want to kind of drive again the point that when Plus One Robotics looks at specifically induction, partial induction, we recognize one thing, right? Is that humans are awesome. It's literally written into our motto. Robots do the working, people rule, right? So and I love this phrase because it kind of catches the essence of what we're doing, right? We're putting the robots to do the dull, dirty, and dangerous task while allowing people to shine, right? And not just, rule in the sense of like, oh, they're telling the robot what to do, right? They're also ruling in the sense of like, we recognize that human talent is one, amazing, and should be put into tasks that better utilize like the cognition, the adaptability, our ability to do complicated tasks, right? And again, it's why robots belong in boring spaces. And for the business sense of it, whenever you go robotic, the predictability will mean more profit for you, right? There's no more influxes of, good days, bad days, right? You just get a consistent 96, 97% day in and day out. And not just in this industry, right? If there is a boring task or a dull task or a dangerous task, it will get automated at some point. And so the conversation now becomes, okay, how do we start upskilling employees, right? Not just in the space, across the board. And a human in the loop can support this kind of like question, right? Don't just get rid of that historical knowledge, add a human to it, and not only that, also support the shortfalls of AI. Okay. So back to you, Lisa.
All right. Awesome. Thanks so much, Jose, for that presentation. Are there any questions for Jose on anything that he covered or computer vision maybe in general?
I have a quick question.
Yes, sure.
I'm looking at the brochure for Yonder, and you attempt to quantify the uh, labor cost of exceptions and the robots being confused, and how with this tool compressing that time would save $14 million. I mean, that's an interesting calculation because everyone's always
Mhm.
trying to understand ROI. And I just wonder if you can defend that number or how you even tried to quantify that.
So we do, thank you for that question. We have a Yonder calculator. I'm not that familiar with it, so I'm not going to be able to speak that technically to it, but we have a Yonder calculator that will show all of the factors that we're taking into consideration.
Yeah,
And someone from our finance department has put that together. And
amazing.
he's got the background. The reason he did this, his name is Matt Spear. The reason he did this is because he has worked closely with our past clients to understand their shifts, when the ROI makes sense. Like if you're running a one shift operation, maybe automation isn't right for you right now, right?
Yeah,
Given the pricing and things like that. But if you are someone who runs more shifts, and maybe depending on your geography, are you in the US or are you in South America? Are you in the northern US or are you in the southern US? Those types of factors go into it.
sure. Thank you.
To add
So,
to add to that a little bit, I think so from whenever those calculations also take into account is the time that it takes to recover a robot that doesn't have Yonder, because we have cells, we have real systems that don't have the Yonder component to it, and
I
instead
see.
of
Well, that makes
yep
sense. You compare actual adopters of your solution to those that have added the yonder component, and then you could show, the actual savings by
Yeah,
compressing the time.
yeah, because a lot of times, right, if you don't have yonder and the robot does fall out, it's not just a quick, call to the internet. Now it requires a physical employee to e-stop a cell, reach in there, remove whatever it was blocking the
Yep.
system, take it back out, and then you multiply this over the amount of times we know we ask for help, right? We know that we can get a consistent 96, 97, so about 3% of shift time, right? So a lot of these calculations are in there, and I think it would be a really cool um, follow-up conversation to have with our actual finance guy on
I
like how those
agree.
calculations are made. Yeah.
And also, it's great you were able to get the term yonder on its own, because people think blue yonder, which is in the warehouse automation space for the
Mm,
software. You should tie yonder to blue yonder, and then people would have even more value.
right. Yeah.
I
And
think.
then,
Oh, I
sorry, go
was just
ahead.
going to say, I know that our CEO and their CEO, they've met up at shows, and I think there's like
Yeah.
a picture of them together floating around. Yeah.
Excellent.
So,
So, can I ask one more question?
yeah,
That
go
me.
ahead.
So, when you think about all the different applications and the technologies, I watched your product in action at Modex in 3 different booths. There was a system integrator and your booth, and then another booth. And
Mhm.
it was interesting because what I saw was the gripper technology in a pallet stacking and breakdown type of application, like a giant Tetris, and how the edge computing power enables your product to figure out how to optimize, say, a pallet. Is that, would you say, your core application outside of the original applications in UPS and US Postal Service as you get into, the rest of the world?
Is the question, so you saw
I
us
mean,
do
I
parcel
just
induction.
parcel induction is, I guess everything you do is parcel induction, but pallet stacking and destacking, is that your number
Yes.
one application?
I'd say it's probably our number 2 application.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more variability with depal and palletizing, because if you can think of like dog food bags, or cases of water that are shrink wrapped, or cases of cans that are shrink wrapped, right? Like now you have shiny because of the cans and shiny because of the plastic, or is it just like a giant box of Doritos? So when it comes to parcels, it's boxes and it's poly bags, and you might have like some graphics issues on there, but we've been doing parcel induction the longest, so I'd say it's,
Mhm.
there's we're focusing the tech on dpal and pal right now, just because we've shored up a lot of the gaps in knowledge on the parcel side. And so but yeah, that's our,
I guess
I
both
guess you could say our number
trajectories
2
are
tech.
great.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have
Sure.
another question here, which is what are the major challenges when installing your robotics at your client site? Do you want to take this, Lisa, or you want me to take it?
Let me see, what are your major challenges in installing your robotics at client sites? um let's see, that's interesting. I know that when it comes to employee acceptance, we have had some facilities where they were excited and welcomed robotics and automation. And then there's others where there's been pushback, at least initially. And so, that's something that we work with the client on, kind of showing everybody that this is, when you think of conveyors that didn't, people still had jobs. It just scaled everything. There's still going to be jobs there. and people still be needed, as Jose mentioned. But we've got a team dedicated to that. We've got someone on our customer service side who works with the client to help that out. So I'd say that's one that comes to mind. Jose, do you have any other experiences you can recall?
Yeah, so I think one of the initial setbacks, I would say even before my time here, right, is how different sites can be. One of the hardest part is figuring out the setting that we're going to place the robot in. Are you on a mezzanine? Are you straight onto the concrete? Do you have skylights all above your building, or are you in a completely enclosed space? I would say the biggest challenge is identifying those factors early on so that we can, make sure that the solution that we're providing will actually work the day that it's installed, right? So I would say the hardest part is the information gathering phase, right? But once you have that information, I always go back to knowing what you don't know. You can make a really good decision and make really good designs based on that. And then there's
Yeah,
a
I'm trying to read these here. Can you email those calculations and how future clients can easily see when good ROI in which scenarios? Yes, I believe we have a presentation put together with that. So let me look into that and we can share that as well. Can you work in frozen environments? We haven't had any clients request frozen scenarios. I don't know, Jose, is there any reason we couldn't work in frozen environments?
No, I think it would just mostly come down to the package types that you want to have. The only thing I can kind of see being an issue is maybe moisture, right? When things are wet, things get slippery, but also the cups are kind of resistant to that. That's actually a really good question. We haven't had the opportunity to work in Frozen, but luckily,
Like
right?
yeah, I would say like it'd probably be best at that point to find an integrator who is really familiar with working in those environments because it's going to come down to the hardware. The vision can see anything like
Yeah,
that, the
yes.
temperature won't matter at all. But it's going to be if the gripper can grip the material, is it whatever, it's shrink wrapped or a bag or a box or something like that.
Yes, I think it would definitely be more of a mechanical issue. Um, but because luckily, like the robots are meant to work regardless of the temperature that they're in. The vision can work regardless of the temperature that they're in. It really becomes right. Remember, I always go back. Humans have great mechanical design, our hands. Robots are we have to make modifications depending on the application. Really good question, by the way. Definitely gets my gears turning for some testing in the future.
All right, so I'm noticing we're a minute over time, and there's a couple announcements I want to cover. These are awesome questions, everyone. Thanks so much. Jose, can you advance to the next slide, please? All right, so our next webinar is going to be December 6th. So usually it's the last Wednesday of the month, but we've got the Thanksgiving holiday. So we're going to push it out a week. And also Alex will be back by then and we'll be talking about DeepHal. So I have the link here for you if you want to grab that, but we'll be pushing it out on social media too if you want to sign up. Okay, and then next slide. This is a busy season for those of us in sales and marketing. We've been all over the place in October and November. We've got a couple more stops. So we'll be at Pack Expo next week. If you're interested in meeting up with us, please shoot us a message at hello@plusonerobotics.com. Or you can email me, myself, or Jose directly. I've got that on the next slide. But anyway, we'll be in Chicago next week. We also have a reception on Monday night. So that's going to be at 6 o'clock at a place called Ace Bounce. It's a ping pong party, guys. So we won't talk as much shop. We'll just, decompress from the day a little bit. Our new president will be there. His name is Avi Barke. So if you get a chance, please register and we'll introduce you to him. And then also we'll be at the Rockwell Automation Fair. That is later in the month in Anaheim, California. All right, I think I've got one more. All right, and that is it. We'll be reaching out to some of you. It sounds like there's a lot of questions that we didn't get to. So again, thanks so much for being here. If you want to connect with myself or Jose on LinkedIn, this is our information. And with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.